The morning Sarah Chen walked into Riverside High, she had no idea that the worst moment of her teaching career would become the day everything changed. The fabric tore with a sickening rip that echoed through the silent gymnasium. Sarah stood frozen at the podium, clutching the remnants of her blouse as 300 pairs of eyes stared at her exposed shoulder and the worn undershirt beneath. The laughter started small, a snicker from the back. Then spread like wildfire through the assembled students. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she fumbled to hold the torn pieces together, her hands trembling so violently she could barely grip the attendance sheet. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This was supposed to be her fresh start. "Nice shirt, Miss Chen?" Jake Morrison's voice boomed from the senior section, dripping with mockery. His friends erupted in laughter, high-fiving each other as if they'd just won some twisted victory. "Guess teachers don't make enough for decent clothes, huh?" Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but standing on this stage with her poverty laid bare for everyone to see. The blouse had been her best one, or rather, her only professional one. She'd spent an hour that morning carefully ironing it, trying to hide the frayed collar and faded color. Now it hung in tatters, ruined by Jake's accidental bump as she'd stepped up to the microphone. "That's enough," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. But her words were drowned out by the continuing laughter and whispered comments rippling through the crowd. Principal Davies rushed onto the stage with his jacket, draping it over Sarah's shoulders with an apologetic grimace. "Take 5 minutes," he murmured. "Compose yourself in my office." Sarah fled the stage, Jake's triumphant laughter following her down the corridor. Behind the closed door of the principal's office, she finally let the tears fall. This was her 3rd week at Riverside High, and already she was marked as the weak one, the easy target. At 26, she was barely older than some of her students, and they could smell her inexperience like sharks sensing blood in the water. She thought about her mother, working double shifts at the diner to help pay Sarah's student loans. She thought about her little sister, Maria, who looked up to her with such pride. "You're going to change lives," Maria had said just that morning. Some life changer she was turning out to be. Sarah dabbed at her eyes, reapplied her lipstick with shaking hands, and made a decision. She wouldn't quit. She wouldn't give Jake Morrison and his crew the satisfaction. She straightened Principal Davies's jacket around her shoulders and walked back into that gymnasium with her head high. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of awkward silences and pitying glances. By lunch, the incident had spread through the school like a virus. Students she'd never met stared at her in the hallways. Someone had already created a meme with her face, captioned "Teacher of the Year." Sarah saw it on a student's phone screen and felt her stomach drop. But Sarah had a class to teach, and she wasn't going to let humiliation stop her. Her afternoon period was junior English, and Jake Morrison sat in the back row with his feet up on the desk, smirking like a king on his throne. His friends flanked him, Tyler, Chen, and Marcus, Wright, forming what the other students called the untouchables, rich kids with powerful parents who'd never faced real consequences for anything. "Today," Sarah began, her voice steadier than she felt, "we're going to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird and the concept of walking in someone else's shoes." Jake yawned elaborately. "Boring." Sarah ignored him and continued. "Atticus Finch tells Scout that you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." "Maybe we should try walking around in your shirt," Tyler muttered, loud enough for the class to hear. Laughter erupted again. Sarah's hands clenched around her book, but she kept her voice calm. "That's exactly my point. Tyler, thank you for the segue." She set down the book and looked directly at Jake. "Let me tell you all a story, a true story." The classroom fell quiet, curiosity temporarily overriding cruelty. "When I was 8 years old, my father died in a construction accident. He was an immigrant, working 3 jobs to give my family a better life. He fell from scaffolding because his employer cut corners on safety equipment to save money." Sarah's voice didn't waver, though her heart was pounding. "My mother became a single parent to 2 daughters overnight. She worked herself to the bone to keep us fed and in school. There were nights we ate rice and beans for dinner because that's all we could afford. There were winters. I wore the same coat with the broken zipper because we couldn't buy a new one. The classroom was completely silent now. Even Jake had lowered his feet from the desk. I wore secondhand clothes throughout high school. Goodwill specials and hand-me-downs from cousins. I watched kids like you, she gestured to Jake and his friends, show up in designer jeans and the latest sneakers while I tried to hide the holes in my shoes. I heard the whispers, saw the looks, felt the exclusion. I know exactly what it's like to be judged for something beyond your control. Sarah walked slowly down the aisle, her words gaining strength. But you know what? Every single experience, every hardship, every moment of humiliation taught me something invaluable. It taught me empathy. It taught me resilience. It taught me that a person's worth has nothing to do with the price tag on their clothes and everything, to do with the content of their character. She stopped beside Jake's desk. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I became a teacher because I remember what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, and invisible. I wanted to be the person who sees every student, who fights for every kid, regardless of where they come from or what they wear. Even the ones who tear my shirt and mock my poverty. Her voice softened. Especially those ones. Jake's face had gone pale. Around the room, students were wiping their eyes. "So here's your homework," Sarah said, returning to the front of the class. "I want you to research local families in need. Find someone who could use help, a family struggling with medical bills, a single parent working multiple jobs, a kid who can't afford school supplies. Then I want you to figure out how you can help them, not for extra credit, not for college applications, but because it's the right thing to do." The bell rang, but nobody moved. Finally, Jake stood up, his usual swagger gone. "Ms. Chen?" His voice cracked. "Can I talk to you?" The other students filed out slowly, many touching Sarah's arm as they passed, murmuring apologies. When the room was empty except for Jake, Tyler and Marcus, the three boys, approached her desk. Jake's eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm sorry." The words came out strangled. "I'm so sorry." I was a complete jerk. I never thought about... He couldn't finish. "I've been that kid," Tyler added, his voice thick with emotion. "The one making fun of others to feel better about myself. My parents are getting divorced, and I've been taking it out on everyone else. That's not an excuse, but..." He shook his head. "You didn't deserve that." "None of it." Marcus, usually the quietest of the three, spoke up. "My mom grew up poor. She tells me stories like yours, and I never really listened. I don't know what I thought, but seeing you stand up there after what we did, hearing your story," his voice broke. "You're the strongest person I've ever met." Sarah felt her own tears threatening. "Strength isn't about never falling down," she said softly. "It's about getting back up, even when everything in you wants to stay down. It's about choosing kindness when the world gives you every reason to be bitter. How do we make this right?" Jake asked desperately. "Please tell us how to fix this." Sarah looked at these three boys, these children, really, despite their size and bravado, and saw not bullies, but broken kids in need of direction. You start by doing the assignment, genuinely. Find someone who needs help and help them. Then tomorrow, you come back and you treat every single person in this school with respect. You use your privilege and your influence to lift others up, instead of tearing them down. "We will," Jake promised. "I swear we will." What happened next rippled through Riverside High like a revolution. Jake, Tyler, and Marcus didn't just complete the assignment, they transformed it into a school-wide initiative. They discovered Mrs. Patricia Williams, a cafeteria worker whose husband had cancer and whose family was drowning in medical debt. The three boys pooled their allowances, organized a fundraiser, and rallied the entire student body. Within 2 weeks, they'd raised $15,000 for Mrs. Williams' family. The story spread to local news, but Jake insisted on one condition. The segment had to feature Ms. Chen and tell her story. "She's the reason any of this happened," he told the reporters. "She taught us what it means to be human." The day the news segment aired, Sarah walked into school to find 300 students, waiting in the gymnasium, the same place where she'd been humiliated. But this time they erupted in applause. Jake stood at the podium holding a garment bag. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice amplified through the microphone, "we wanted to replace what we destroyed, but then we realized a new shirt wasn't enough. Nothing could replace what you gave us, a conscience, a purpose, a reason to be better. He opened the garment, bag to reveal not a blouse, but a framed certificate. This is a scholarship we've established in your father's name. Every year, it will help a student from a low-income family attend college. Because you showed us that people like your dad, people who work hard and sacrifice everything for their families, are the real heroes. Sarah stood there, tears streaming down her face, as the students chanted her name. Principal Davies handed her a tissue with a proud smile. You didn't just teach them English, Sarah. You taught them humanity. That evening, Sarah called her mother and sister, her voice still shaky with emotion. You won't believe what happened today, she began. As she recounted the story, she realized that the worst moment of her career had, indeed, become the best, not because of the recognition or the scholarship, but because 3 troubled boys had learned that cruelty costs nothing but kindness changes everything. Jake Morrison graduated 2 years later as valedictorian. His speech focused on a teacher who'd taught him that the measure of a person isn't found in their wardrobe, but in their willingness to stand back up after being knocked down. He looked directly at Sarah in the audience and mouthed, "Thank you." In the end, that torn shirt became a symbol, not of humiliation, but of transformation. It represented the moment when vulnerability became strength, when pain became purpose, and when one woman's courage sparked a wildfire of compassion that would burn bright in the hearts of her students for the rest of their lives.